spoken to me a lot of times recently, but it keeps coming to me, which is not to reduce my faith to rules, to a set of rules. There's one thing that I've seen is that Satan's always seeking to attempt, at least in my life, attempting to reduce my faith to a set of rules, to, what I believe is essentially what I can do or what I can't do. And it goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden, right? When he wanted man to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That if we eat from the tree of rules, even though maybe we're doing good things, Satan has won the victory in the sense that he has severed us from the most important thing. He severed us from connection to our Father, utter and complete dependence upon him. And so as long as we're living from our knowledge of right and wrong, we actually, even if we're doing good things, Satan wins because we aren't connected to God. And I think that God would much rather us know nothing of right and wrong, but just listen to every single word which he speaks and wait for his voice than have a nice set of rules. And I saw, as I was thinking about that this week, I've seen it clearly. It's exemplified in the law. Think about the law as a set of rules, a perfect set of rules given by God to man. And yet Hebrews 1 tells us, or Hebrews 10 rather, in verse 1 it says, essentially, I'm paraphrasing, but the law could never make people perfect, even those who diligently sought to obey it. So we see that the best set of rules given by God to man, even that set of rules doesn't produce the kind of righteousness which pleases God. And but still, even still, there's such an allure for rules, at least for me. And it's so tempting to see the knowledge of good and evil as my salvation in practical daily life. That if I just know that this is the right thing to do, that's what I can grab a hold of, and that's what I can take hope in. And it's just over and over again, I feel the Lord say, no, that's not right at all. I'm not meant, God is meant to be my salvation, and God is meant to be the one I treasure. And I'm not even meant to treasure what he says to me so much as I'm treasuring that he is saying it to me. And I found many times I fall when I grab a hold of something that he said and I hold on to that forever rather than saying, no, I'm going to hold on to the one who's speaking and continue to grab a hold of him and every day say, Lord, I have to hear from you today. I'm not going to depend on what I heard yesterday. I want you, not your rules. I don't want to make my faith a set of rules. And living by rules creates a lot of problems. There's a story that there's a passage in Zechariah in chapter 7 that really spoke to me this week. In Zechariah, it's right at the end of the Old Testament. In chapter 7 and verse 2, it says, so the context is Israel has been exiled into Babylon for 70 years now. And in verse 2 it says, the town of Bethel had sent some priests and their men to seek the favor of the Lord, speaking to the priests who belonged to the house of the Lord of hosts and to the prophets, saying, and this is what they wanted to ask, shall we weep in the 5th month and abstain, as we have done these many years? And what I see there is these people, they keep asking, just like I do, if I just followed this rule, will I be pleasing to God? Lord, you've seen that I've done this. If I keep doing that, is that what you want? What I see kind of in the subtext there is, aren't you pleased with our pattern of fasting? Every year for 70 years, in the 5th month, we've abstained from food. Isn't that what you want, God? Don't you want that from us? And just tell me, and I do this all the time, just tell me and I'll keep it up. I'll keep doing that thing because you must be pleased with that. And I see in verse 6, God says, or in verse 5, it says, say to all the people of the land and to the priests, when you fasted and mourned in the 5th and 7th months, these 70 years, was it actually for me that you fasted? God's response is, I acknowledge you've been fasting, absolutely, but was it for me? And do you want to know how you can know whether it's from him or for him, is what I feel like God's saying in verse 6. He says, how do you know whether you're fasting and mourning in the 5th and 7th months for 70 years? How do you know if it's for me? Verse 6, when you eat and drink, do you eat for yourself and do you drink for yourself? And so what I saw there is that how I can know whether my mourning and fasting and abstaining is for the Lord is my rejoicing and partaking also for the Lord. Do I partake? Is my life for God defined by what I don't do? Or is my life with God defined by everything that which I don't do, that which I do, everything in my life. Is that how I define my life with God? And I see what living by these rules basically for 70 years accomplished. In verse 12, God says, they made their hearts like flint so that they could not hear the law and the words which the Lord of hosts had sent. So it says they made their hearts like flint. You know, there are other times where the Bible says that God hardened someone's heart, but here it says they made their hearts like flint. They hardened their hearts. And the way they did it was they reduced their faith to what they can't do. They defined their faith in terms of what they abstained from. And that's actually what hardened their hearts. They refused to surrender their whole life. And God keeps pointing to, for me, a life entirely surrendered, poured out for Him, not partitioned for Him. It's so much easier to think about a life partitioned for God. And here's your portion, here's what I'll give you. But God doesn't want His part. He wants everything. And as long as I've reduced my faith to what I'm not doing for His sake, then I'm also in danger. Just like they were, I'm in danger. And I see that this is most disturbingly displayed. It kind of reaches its climax, at least in the Bible, in the lives of the Pharisees. There's a really interesting verse that I saw this week. It's in John 18. It's so disturbing. It's John 18 and verse 28. It's when the Pharisees are delivering up Jesus to Pilate. It says in verse 28, then they led Jesus from Caiaphas into the praetorium, and it was early. And they themselves did not enter the praetorium so that they would not be defiled, but might eat the Passover. I see here, this is a prime example of majoring in the minors. I mean, they were literally delivering Jesus up to be murdered. And yet, as they did that, the most wicked thing imaginable, as they did that, they were really conscientious not to break any little law so they wouldn't be defiled for the Passover. It's unbelievable. And they truly think, I think, that they were keeping themselves from being defiled. They truly believed it. We're being so careful not to enter the praetorium, because if we do, then we can't take Passover. And yet they were ultimately defiling themselves. They, of all people, were ultimately defiled by the very acts they were doing. And so I see they're so diligent in little matters, but they were completely negligent in weighty matters. And I see it's a danger for me too. That if my life with God is just always defined by what I abstain from, I won't go to the praetorium. It's ultimately a very, very small percentage of my life. The things that I abstain from is a very small percentage of my life. And I'm in danger of majoring in the minors, just like the Pharisees. And I want my life to be with God to be exemplified in everything I do. You know, Paul says, whatever you do, whether you eat or drink, do it all to the glory of God. Things as simple as eating and drinking. You know, he says in another part, I think it's Romans 14 maybe, he says, those who eat, do it to the glory of God. Those who don't eat, also do it to the glory of God. And I see that the motivation is everything. It's not what am I doing or what am I not doing, but am I motivated in everything to do it to God's glory? Great, then don't eat. Or great, then do eat. But whatever I do it to the glory of God. And so to me, I feel like that the great danger is that in all of our talk and thinking about what we do, we end up, at least I end up focusing much more on what I lose. It's easiest when I'm boiling my life down to rules. I end up thinking disproportionately about what I'm losing than I am about what I'm gaining. The emphasis or the focus should be, I am gaining Christ. I gain Christ Jesus. And as long as my life and spiritual walk is defined by what I'm not doing, I lose sight of the fact that the ultimate is that I gain Christ. And Paul says, I'll count everything as rubbish for the sake of gaining Christ, that I might know Him and the power of His resurrection and the fellowship of His sufferings, being conformed to His death, that I might also attain to the resurrection of the dead. Paul had his eyes fixed on what he was gaining. And I want to stop letting myself be deceived by Satan, that as long as I'm fixated on what's the right rule, what can I do, what can't I do? No, I want to gain Christ. I want to have my eyes fixed on the hope that I have, not on rules or regulations, but on the hope and the promise of life that's been set before me. And I want to be the kind of Christian who isn't so concerned about what I'm giving up as I am eager and excited about what I gain.